Hi everyone, Anthony Fantano here, internet's busiest music nerd. Hope you're doing well, and it's time for another edition of Let's Argue, where I go online, I accept your hot takes, unpopular opinions, and tough questions. I respond to the best ones, and yeah, that's essentially what we do here. Let's go! Soulja Boy is not as influential as he makes himself out to be. First off, spell the man's name correctly. Put some respect on the man's name, please. I disagree with what our friend is asserting here, because here's the thing. I remember pretty vividly a point in time where Soulja Boy was wildly popular. You guys right now, you have your Millie Rock and you have your Floss Dance, but I knew how to crank that goddamn Soulja Boy. So he had this moment of virality and kind of disappeared off the map, like many artists have done over the years. But the ripple effects of what he did, I think, are moving harder than they ever have been. Because at the time in the late 2000s, Soulja Boy did seem like kind of a weirdo and a goofball. He was a bit of a gimmick and a bit of a spectacle, and he had a lot of attention on him, but very few people who took music seriously took him seriously. But the thing is, the attitude he was putting forward in his songs and the kind of music that he was making and the way he went about marketing himself and reaching out to new fans, that's the new normal. That is current day what artists everywhere are doing across the hip-hop spectrum to gain the attention of fans. Whether it be how he presents himself in his music or music videos, the viral dance moves, how he was marketing himself online at the time, plus the ridiculousness, the bluntness, the simplicity of the music that he created at the time went on to influence artists like Lil B. I mean, he literally has a direct connection to the popularity of Lil B, who is unquestionably one of the most popular artists and most influential artists of this decade. Not only that, but there was a recent piece where I think one of the Migos guys was quoted as saying that Soulja Boy is actually incredibly influential. Again, Migos, one of the most influential and popular hip-hop groups out there right now, citing Soulja Boy as an influence. So honestly, I don't think you can really discount Soulja Boy as an influence in hip-hop music. Not only because of what he said in that recent radio interview where he was bringing up flows that have been stolen from him and so on and so forth, but also his style, his sound, his swag is a gigantic precursor to much of what we're hearing right now in the SoundCloud and the trap generation, whether we want to admit it or not, whether the artists participating in it are aware of it or not. Saying dark prog invalidates you as a reviewer. I don't know if the act of making up the term dark prog is exactly what invalidates someone as a reviewer, and our friend here is referring to a recent series of sentences and critiques that the Dean of Rock Critics, Robert Christgau, had for yours truly. Again, I don't think asserting or making up the term is necessarily silly, because fans and music critics come up with new terminology all the time for prevailing trends and new sounds and music. Sometimes it catches on, sometimes it doesn't, and frankly, some of the most popular terms that we use to describe genres and subgenres are pretty dumb and almost useless when it comes to describing the actual sound, vibe, and feeling of the music that you're talking about. I think when it gets kind of silly is when you're asserting a term again and again and again, and it's not really catching on, it doesn't really explain the thing that you're talking about all that much, and it just, to any outsider, sounds silly. Pitchfork is the worst thing that happened to music. I mean, listen, I get it. Pitchfork has put out a lot of thoughts and opinions and pieces that are really disagreeable and maybe a little overly harsh. However, there are certainly a lot of people who would accuse me of the very same thing. People hate on Pitchfork all the time, and I get and I understand why. Like, if they have a point of view that you feel like is kind of half-assed and they haven't really put effort into a review and they haven't really talked in depth about the music all that much in the review, it does get pretty aggravating. And if I was completely happy and pleased with the current state of music journalism back in 2007, 2008, 2009, I wouldn't have started the needle drop in the first place. The only reason I started this YouTube channel is that I thought I could put my own interesting spin on it that not other music reviewers and critics were at the time. So obviously I wasn't all that crazy about what was going on in internet-based music journalism up until the point where I started my YouTube channel, but I have to admit platforms like Pitchfork Media did kind of pave the way for me and anybody else who has independently taken it upon themselves to talk about music online. I'm really struggling to see exactly what it is that Pitchfork has done to ruin music. They're the worst thing to happen to music. Because back in their heyday, Pitchfork did put on some pretty great bands and create a platform that allowed the indie boom to kind of thrive. And while I may not like some of the opinions Pitchfork has put out over the years, as well as the symbiotic relationships and conflicts of interests created between them and indie record labels and indie artists and advertisers and PR firms serving those labels and artists. This is the name of the game at every level of the music industry. Just because it's happening on this micro level in indie sense doesn't really make it any better or worse. I guess in my eyes anyway. And that's because I see independent labels and the PR firms that cater to the artists on those labels and the journalistic institutions that primarily cover these artists and these outlets. I see them as a business just like I do anything else. Sure, maybe the music and art they cover is a bit cooler and more alternative, and there's a greater emphasis on things like authenticity. People hate on Greta Van Fleet for ripping off Led Zeppelin, but Wolfmother did the same thing 10 years ago earlier, arguably to a greater degree of similarity. I don't disagree that Wolfmother has ripped off a lot of their ideas over the years from the Led Zeppelin discography. However, there's not really an aspect of Wolfmother's sound, or especially a lot of tunes off of their first record, that I would say is like a dead ringer for a Led Zeppelin song. A huge influence, sure. But I mean, if you take a song like Woman, for example, off of their first record, it doesn't really sound much like any Led Zeppelin song out there, especially from the production end of things, because at that time, Wolfmother was definitely embracing a somewhat heavier, punchier, sludgier sound that a lot of rock bands were embracing at the time, these overdriven guitar tones that were very popular on White Stripes records that were doing really well at the time. So while, yeah, in a lot of ways, Wolfmother was definitely a throwback in their time, they did showcase a production style that was very much of that era in the 2000s. I can't really say that's the same for Greta Van Fleet, as I've said in my review of their last record. There are tracks on that album that sound like they could literally be long-lost Led Zeppelin B-sides. I could possibly be wrong because I was never a huge Wolfmother fan. However, I do remember the music they were putting out back when I was in college, and I don't recall anything I ever heard sounding like a dead ringer for Led Zeppelin. Like, I would mistake it for Led Zeppelin. And again, with Greta Van Fleet, I just feel like that is the case, at least for me. Of course, like a Led Zeppelin in a diminished capacity, but still the confusion, the deception is there. Mambo No. 5 is a timeless bop. Mambo No. 5 sucks. It's garbage. Do not test me. Do not test me today. I'm not having it today. No, I'm not having it. Dälek deserves more credit for Death Grip's sound than they currently get. While, yes, you can't really deny that Dälek was laying the groundwork and just generally being ahead of the curve when it comes to this industrial hip-hop stuff, and just by virtue of that, you can't really rule them out as a potential influence for Death Grips, there are still, in my opinion, a lot of sounds and a lot of styles and a lot of borrowed musical ideas that go into Death Grip's music, and Dälek is honestly not one of the first ones that comes to mind on a lot of their records. So I don't know if personally it bothers me to not see them brought up in more conversations around what Death Grip sounds like and why they sound that way. It does sort of bug me that for a lot of young music fans, this whole industrial hip-hop thing, it starts with Death Grips when in fact that is not the case at all. It predates them by a pretty large margin. Sure, they brought a new sound to it, a ton of new ideas, and they helped popularize it, but it pre-exists them. Once the Egg makes a song, it'll be the most liked song of all time! It's true, once you do get a bit of internet clout, you should start creating as much cheap and horrible music as you possibly can ASAP, so that you start, just getting those streams, start capitalizing on the music game. Maybe you get a platinum track. So, the Egg definitely should come out with some music. Tea is basically hot diluted leaf water, and that's gross. There, I said it. What do you got against leaves? Leaves are great. Spinach leaves are yummy. Lettuce leaves are yummy. Is kale a leaf? Is kale a friggin' leaf? I don't know. It's delicious. So what if you want to take some leaves and just like dry them out and then just like put them in some hot water, and then you get, some like cool, yummy tea water? You're just crazy. I don't even know why I go online anymore. Hot take, it's not arguing if you read this tweet in your video and I don't get a rebuttal to your response. Look, other people have pointed this out, and I can't have you guys on here Skyping with me and having arguments about this stuff. It would not make for a very snappy and effective video segment. I think it would go on a little longer than it needs to. I'm just doing the best that I can. The fact that so many artists come out and say they are done with music is shameful. It's understood that the industry is a cutthroat shithole, but for somebody to quit music due to pressures and other issues is something truly sad. Music is supposed to be fun, not work. I feel like the music is supposed to be fun and not work, man, is a really easy opinion to hold for somebody whose job is not in the music industry. Look, music is great. Music is entertaining. Music is fantastic. I love music. I would not want to live a life without music. Generally, I think the arts are an amazing thing that enriches our lives as a species. I wish more people could partake in them. I wish more people could play instruments. I wish more people had opportunities to get into music, to play music, to understand and consume music. All that being said, though, the moment that you make music your job, whether you're making it, promoting it, writing about it, it does become a job. And even though it's centered around something that you like, it's still work, and there are going to be aspects of it that are really unenjoyable, especially if you sign a contract with a label that is kind of stepping on your creative freedom. It is sad to see the industry sort of suck the life and passion out of so many artists, much in the same way that I guess art school does to some artists too. But again, the moment you turn this really great, fun, creative endeavor into an institution or a business, there are going to be negative effects that come with that. Bowie probably knew how powerful the internet would be for marketing music well before any of us did. He had Telling Lies as a downloadable single back in the late 90s when Earthling was released and put up hours for download online in 1999. This wasn't commonly done prior. That's actually amazing. I did not know that about David Bowie, but I guess it only goes to show how forward-thinking that he was in his day, even in the late 90s. And yes, during this time, I remember actually looking for and downloading a lot of music online illegally using these person-to-person servers over like a dial-up connection. So it took you like 30 minutes to a few hours to download a single song at a really crappy bitrate. So you were hearing that track in horrible quality outside of these illegal downloading services. The standard for listening to and consuming and finding out about music was very much offline. It was on television, it was on radio, it was in magazines. Most people were not going to the internet to find out about new music and artists and hear songs. So for Bowie to think, hey, I'm just going to throw my music out here for people to listen to is pretty incredible. Protest music is harder to make and sustain in the internet era due to organized trolling and direct access. As someone who is not very shy when it comes to voicing his political opinion online, yeah, doing so can certainly lead to some targeted harassment and trolls, and people take a thing that you've said and they mischaracterize it. To me, it just kind of is what it is, and I feel like it comes with the territory of putting your opinions and your ideas out there. People are free to argue their own right back at you, and they may choose to do so in a very nasty way. But that doesn't necessarily make it not worth doing, because when we look back on some of the best political and protest songs and popular music in general, those sentiments and those arguments were made usually in a hostile environment and in such a way where they were going against prevailing trends, going against the grain. If you're throwing ideas and throwing arguments out there online or in your music, you may come to a point where some anonymous troll shitposty people are trying to get in your craw and make you feel awful and attack you. I guess just anticipate it and don't let it put you in a position where you are shaken in your principles. And I think I'm going to leave it at that, everybody. Thank you for watching another edition of Let's Argue. You're the best. Over here next to my head is another video that you can check out. Hit that up, or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, music, blah, 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 forever.